Welcome to Skinner and Chalmers' Sleigh Bell Stories, a sleigh ride of festive tales and unexpected twists. Today's story for the second advent, the Räuchermännchen's Secret, a journey to the Erzgebirge.
Well, hello, dear listeners, and welcome to this special Chris edition of Skinner and Chalmers' Weekly Roast. Today is the second advent, and this time it turned to tell you a heartfelt Christmas story. So, it's just me, your old Paul Skinner, guiding you through a tale of holiday cheer, mystery, and a little bit of Memifield mischief. Chalmers sends his regards. Of course, he's currently on kitchen duty trying to perfect his eggnog recipe. Spoiler alert, it's mostly bourbon. Now, before we dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to wish each and every one of you a wonderful festive season, or a happy holidays, if that's more your speed. It's the time of year when lights twinkle, snow falls, and even Garfield looks a little less grumpy. Though let's not get carried away, he still refuses to wear a full Santa suit. Today I want to share a story that's a bit different from our usual Memfield antics. It's about a journey, a winter adventure that Chalmers and I took a few years ago to a magical place called the Erzgebirge. Now if you're scratching your head wondering what or where the Erzgebirge is, don't worry. I was in the same boat when Dizenzo, our producer, first mentioned it to us. The Erzgebirge, or the Ore Mountains, as they're called in English, is a region in Saxony in Germany, right along the border with the Czech Republic. It's a land of rolling hills, deep forests, and snow-covered villages that look like they've been plucked straight from a Christmas card. The name comes from its history as a mining region. Ore Mountains, you see. But these days, it's definitely also famous for something a little more festive. You see, the Erzgebirge and Christmas go together like me and burnt roast. It's a place where holiday traditions run deep, where every window glows with warm light from something called a Schwibbegen. Now, a Schwibbogen, or a candle arch as we'd call it, is a wooden arc filled with candles. In a modern interpretation, the lights on the arch symbol miners the longing for daylight, which they often did not get to see for weeks, especially in the winter months. You probably know the drill. It was still dark when they started work in the early morning, and the sun had already set by the end of the shift in the evening, and today it's one of the most iconic symbols of Christmas in the Erzgebirge. Chalmers, ever the historian, couldn't stop himself from pointing out every single Schwibbegen in every single window we passed. "Skinner," he said, "look at the craftsmanship. These aren't your run-of-the-mill holiday decorations. This is art," and each one was a little masterpiece, often featuring scenes of miners, angels, or nativity figures, all glowing with the soft, golden light of candles. But these candle arcs were just the beginning. The Erzgebirge is also home to something called a Räuchermännchen. I know it's pretty hard to say its name, but in English, we'd call it a smoking man. These little wooden figures, shaped like miners' foresters, or sometimes jolly old Santa Claus himself, are designed to hold a small incense cone inside. When lit, the cone smokes gently, curling up through the figure's pipe or chimney. It's like a tiny puff of holiday magic, and trust me, it smells wonderful. Two incense cone manufacturers are particularly well known in the Ore Mountains, namely the Kratendorf Räucherkätzchen, where our producer Dizenzo even had an internship as a teenager back in the day, and Neudorf Räucherkätzchen. Which of the two smells better? Well, people in the region disagree on that. Some like this one, others like that one more. Now, when I first saw one of these Räuchermännchen, I thought, oh, what a quaint little trinket. But then I lit the incense cone, and the room filled with the most wonderful smell. Spices, pine, a hint of mystery. Chalmers claimed it reminded him of his time as a university lecturer, though I'm not sure how. Perhaps the Christmas lectures where he ate biscuits and cake with his students instead of tedious slide lectures. Anyways, our trip to the Erzgebirge was during Advent, a time when the whole region comes alive with Christmas spirit. Villages transform into seas of lights, what they call a Lichtermeer, and the markets. Oh, the markets. Rows of stalls selling everything from gingerbread and mulled wine to handcrafted wooden toys. If you ever get the chance to go, start with Annaberg Bookholes. Trust me, it's a magical place. The Annaberg Bookholes Market was where Chalmers and I spent most of our time. Picture this, snow gently falling, the smell of roasted almonds in the air, and everywhere you look, holiday joy. It was there, in a little shop tucked between two larger stalls, that we stumbled upon the Räuchermännchen that would kick off our entire adventure in the Erzgebirge. The shop was packed floor to ceiling with folk art from the Ore Mountains. Nutcrackers, pyramids, more candle arches than you could count. Chalmers immediately gravitated toward the largest nutcracker in the room, muttering something about a symbol of discipline and order. I, meanwhile, found myself drawn to a small shelf filled with Räuchermännchen. And yes, luckily we live in the 21st century. There are also female incense smokers these days. Perhaps there will be even more diverse versions in the future. Chalmers and I would love to see them. And there at the small shop was one Räuchermännchen, in particular that caught my eye, a wooden figure of a miner, holding a lantern in one hand and a pickaxe in the other. It had a certain aura about it, as if it was just waiting for someone to notice it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and said, "Chalmers, this one's coming home with us to Memfield." The shopkeeper was delighted. He said, "You have an excellent eye. This Räuchermännchen is one of our finest pieces. Would you like to light it here in the shop?" Naturally, I said yes. I mean, how could I resist? He handed me a tiny cone of incense and showed me how to place it inside the wooden smoker. When I lit it, the smell was incredible. It was warm, spicy, and instantly transported me to a cozy cabin in the woods. But then something unexpected happened. As the smoke curled out of the miner's little pipe, a tiny compartment in its base popped open, and out fell a piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just some old receipt or a bit of wrapping, which was somehow forgotten during production, but Chalmers, ever the curious one, unfolded it. His eyes widened as he read it aloud. "The way to the best Stollen in the Erzgebirge lies within the heart of its traditions." Now, let me explain something about Stollen or Christstollen. It's a traditional German Christmas pastry, rich, buttery, filled with dried fruits, nuts, and sometimes marzipan. So, it's a bread-shaped cake made from heavy yeast dough. It's dusted with powdered sugar and tastes like the holidays themselves. And in the Erzgebirge, Stollen is practically sacred. Finding the best one, that was a quest we couldn't resist. "Skinner," Chalmers said, "this is clearly a sign. We're meant to find this Stollen and bring it back to Memfield. Imagine the holiday joy it could spread. Imagine Sonic or Yuji taking a bite of it." I couldn't argue with him. The thought of sharing the best Stollen in the Erzgebirge with our friends was too tempting to pass up. And so, armed with a mysterious note and a newfound sense of purpose, we set off on what would become one of the most memorable adventures of our visits in Germany. Little did we know, the journey ahead would be filled with clues, surprises, and a twist we never saw coming. But I'll stop there for now, dear listeners. After all, a good story deserves to be savored, just like a slice of Stollen. Stick around, and I'll tell you all about our hunt for the Erzgebirge's sweetest treasure. This one's going to be a tale for the ages. Naturally, Chalmers and I couldn't start our quest on an empty stomach. Well, I couldn't anyway. So, after tucking that curious note safely away, we treated ourselves to a few more rounds of donuts, roasted almonds, and the most heavenly bowl of soup I've ever had. You'd think Chalmers, with all his discipline and order, would have gone easy on the sweets, but no, there he was, happily crunching away on caramelized almonds, saying something about fueling the mind for our adventure. I said, "Chalmers, if you keep eating like this, we'll need to fuel the sleigh to get you home." After thoroughly enjoying the culinary delights, we set off to explore more of Annaberg Buchholz. If you've never been, let me tell you, this town is pure Christmas magic. Snow dusted the rooftops, the cobblestone streets glistened in the soft glow of streetlights, and nearly every window had a glowing Schwibbogen, the candle arches. As Chalmers and I strolled through the town, admiring the glowing windows, a woman passing by called out, "Glück auf." It's the traditional miner's blessing, roughly meaning so, you could say it means, "Hey there," nowadays. Originally, Glück auf is the German miner's greeting. It describes the miner's hope that veins of ore may open up, because when mining ore, without prospecting, it was difficult to predict whether the miner's work would lead to a reward at all. Now, she probably said it because we looked hopelessly like tourists, especially Chalmers, who was squinting at a map like he was navigating the Amazon. Still, it was charming, or should I say charming. And of course she had more than caught Chalmers talking about mining and stones. You know, Chalmers loves his rocks and geology, and I had to listen to 5 minutes of a conversation about ores while his eyes lit up with joy. Anyways, Chalmers, ever the polite one, tried to respond in German and ended up saying something that sounded like, "Gluppy, oh." The woman gave him a bemused smile and walked away. Good effort. I told him, next time maybe let me handle the local customs. We continued our walk, eventually arriving at St. Anna's Church, a magnificent Gothic building that towers over the town. Inside, the high ceilings and intricate arts took our breath away. The church felt like the heart of Annaberg, Butch Holes, its beauty a reflection of the town's deep traditions and history. As we stood there, gazing at the craftsmanship, I couldn't help but think about the people who built it. It's a testament to the spirit of the Erzgebirge, finding beauty even in the hardest of times, the medieval times which were basically the hardcore mode of life. After our visit to the church, we made our way back to the Christmas market. It was a lovely evening, and the market was aglow with lights. Music filled the air. Children laughed as they rode a small train near the big Christmas tree in the center of the market, and the smell of mulled wine and gingerbread was positively intoxicating. It was here that we encountered one of the Erzgebirge's most iconic traditions, the Christmas pyramid. Now, if you've never seen one, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a towering wooden structure, decorated with candles, ornaments, and Erzgebirge figures. At the very top, a large propeller-like piece spins gently, powered by either candle heat or, in modern times, electricity. I'll admit, when I first saw it, I thought it was some kind of oversized toy, but then a friendly vendor explained its significance. The pyramid, he said, is a symbol of the Christmas season, especially here in the Erzgebirge. Traditionally, it's ceremoniously pushed up at the start of Advent to mark the beginning of the festivities. Apparently, the figures on the pyramid, shepherds, angels, miners, descend from their pedestals during the ceremony to introduce themselves to the crowd. It's quite the spectacle, the vendor said. You too should have been here last week. Naturally, we'd missed it, but he assured us we could still appreciate its beauty, and beautiful it was. The figures spun slowly, illuminated by soft candlelight, creating a mesmerizing display. It reminded me of how events like that, no matter how old, can bring people together. Chalmers, ever the skeptic, asked, "So does it do anything else?" The vendor just smiled and said, "It brings joy and that's enough." By the time we left the market, it was late, and we were thoroughly enchanted. The day had been filled with food, history, and enough Christmas cheer to fill even the grumpiest of hearts. Though Chalmers would insist his heart is already plenty cheerful, thank you very much. Back at our holiday home, we reviewed the note from the Räuchermännchen again. The way to the best Stalin lies within the heart of its traditions. I read aloud. What did it mean? Was the Stalin hidden in plain sight, or was there more to discover? One thing was clear: we needed a good night's sleep and a hearty breakfast if we were going to crack this mystery. Tomorrow, we'd continue our search, delving deeper into the traditions of the Erzgebirge. And so, with bellies full and hearts even fuller, we drifted off to sleep, dreaming of glowing Schwibby gens, spinning pyramids, and the sweet, buttery promise of Christ Stalin. Dear listeners, the adventure was just beginning. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast that could have fueled an entire mining crew, Chalmers and I were ready to continue our quest for the Erzgebirge's finest Christ Stalin. Armed with Räuchermännchen, cryptic note, and a healthy dose of holiday spirit, we decided it was time to involve the locals. "Skinner," Chalmers said, "why waste time bumbling around when we can just ask someone who actually knows the traditions here?" A reasonable suggestion, of course. What he didn't count on was just how colorful the local characters could be. Our first stop was a stall selling nutcrackers. Rows upon rows of stern-looking wooden soldiers in every size and color you could imagine. Chalmers, ever the sucker for symbolism, couldn't resist picking one up. "You know, Skinner," he said, "the nutcracker represents strength and protection, a guardian of the household. Maybe we should invest in one for, well, research purposes, and not because someone almost burns the house down every time he cooks." Before I could reply, the vendor, a jovial man with a mustache and a heavy dialect, chimed in. "Ah, my friend, you have an eye for the finest. May I interest you in this masterpiece?" He pointed to a nutcracker taller than Chalmers himself, complete with a golden crown and a menacing glare. "It's impressive," Chalmers said, stepping back as if it might come to life. "But I don't think it'll fit in my carry-on. You know, we're actually from Memfield." The vendor chuckled and patted the nutcracker on its wooden shoulder. "A pity. It would have kept the thieves away." After politely declining the offer, Chalmers has opted for a 30 centimeters long nutcracker and thinks it will go well with our own Christmas decorations. Although I admit that I would also like to see it in action. Many people in the Erzgebirge often buy the nutcrackers or Räuchermännchen just for decoration and don't use them. Somehow understandable, Dizenzo told us that the wooden smokers really do accumulate a kind of tar or soot over time. But I think, well, then you just clean it. Anyways, after packing one more item in our shopping bag, we moved on and found ourselves surrounded by a group of excited children. One boy, clutching a small lantern, looked up at us and asked, "Are you treasure hunters?" I glanced at Chalmers, who, to his credit, didn't immediately correct them. "Well," I said, "we're hunting something very special. Not treasure exactly, but the best stolen in the Erzgebirge." The children gasped as if I'd just announced I was searching for a dragon. "The best stolen." One girl repeated, "It's got to be near the mine in Ehrenfriedersdorf." Chalmers sighed. "I don't think we're looking for a mine." But the kids were undeterred, bombarding us with questions about maps, secret codes, and whether we'd fought any goblins along the way. Eventually, their parents called them back to their cocoa, gave a smile on us, and we continued our search. That's when we met her, kindly grandmother sitting on a bench, wrapped in a warm shawl, holding a small shopping bag filled with freshly baked bread from the bakery nearby. "Gilkaaf," she greeted us with a smile. "You two look a bit lost. Can I help you?" Before I could explain, she squinted at me and said, "Jürgen, is that you?" "Jürgen," I repeated. "Oh no, I'm afraid you've got the wrong person." She laughed, shaking her head. "Forgive me, dear. My grandson, Jürgen, always forgets his scarf, and you've got that same absent-minded look." "Well, I've been accused of worse," I said. "But I'm Skinner, and this is Chalmers. We're from Memfield, so the United States. We're on a bit of an adventure." She listened intently as I told her about the Räuchermännchen and our search for the best stolen. When I finished, she clapped her hands together. "How wonderful! You must come with me for Kaffee und Kuchen." A proper adventure needs a proper break. And with Kaffee und Kuchen, she actually means coffee and cake, so she invited us into her home and chatted a little while delicious cake was served. She led us to her cozy little house near the forest, where we sat by the window and enjoyed slices of rich, buttery cake and cups of strong coffee. As we ate, she asked us about Memfield, its people, its quirks, and what brought us all the way to the Erzgebirge. "I've always wanted to travel," she said, her eyes twinkling. "But now I'm a bit too old for it. Tell me, is Memfield as charming as they say?" "Charming is one word for it," I said. "Eccentric might be another. But yes, it's a wonderful place. And if you ever decide to visit, we'd be honored to show you around." The old lady said that every little town probably has its own interesting people, in quotation marks. People in the Erzgebirge would call such guys as experts. But she was visibly touched by our offer. She asked me, "You young people, surely you all have a handy with you these days?" To which I replied, "Ah, handy. Oh, you mean a smartphone?" "Oh yes, of course. We can show you some pictures of our city and friends." And so we sat together at the table for about 45 minutes, showing her Yuga's card shop, Sonnet's hedge, our orb pets, Cosmo and the puppies, our pet alligators, and even old Bartholomew, our pet skeleton. She couldn't believe what a crazy bunch of chickens we are, but she seemed visibly happy. She smiled and told us about the food at Christmas in the Erzgebirge, the traditional kluse kind of potato dumplings, the Ninnerla feast with its 9 symbolic dishes, and of course, the legendary Chris Stalin. I jotted down notes while Chalmers muttered something about fire hazards. "Skinner," he said, "Shoo, I trust you're not planning to cook any of this when we get back." "Relax, Chalmers, I'll stick to ordering in," I said, while I crossed my fingers behind my back, which Chalmers saw, of course, because he knows me too well. And as we chatted, she gave us a hint about our quest. "Look for the lights in the windows and the stars in the trees," she said. "That's where the spirit of Christmas in the Erzgebirge truly shines." Before we left, we changed addresses and phone numbers and promised to send her a gift from Memfield, bottle of Chalmers' favorite Yip Foop Whoop wine. She laughed and said, "I'll toast to your adventure. Good luck with your journey." With our spirits lifted and our clue in hand, we set off to search for the best decorated houses in town. The adventure was far from over, and I couldn't wait to see where the lights and stars would lead us next. Fresh from our heartwarming chat with the kindly grandmother and armed with our latest clue, look for the lights in the windows and the stars in the trees. Chalmers and I set off deeper into the Erzgebirge. Now, let me tell you, finding lights and stars in this region during Christmas is like looking for sand on a beach. They're everywhere. Nearly every house had a glowing schwibbogen in the window, each one more elaborate than the last. Some featured miners with tiny pickaxes, others had angels holding candles, and a few even depicted entire nature scenes. Chalmers kept stopping every 10 feet to admire them, muttering things like, "Exquisite craftsmanship," and "Skinner, these people know what they're doing." Meanwhile, I was starting to feel like we'd need an entire star chart just to follow this clue. The problem was, the old lady's advice was just too broad. Every window glowed, every tree sparkled. Where were we supposed to start? That's when we spotted a notice board outside a small bakery. Among the flyers for concerts and cookie exchanges was an article about something called a Christmas mountain, or as they call it, a Weihnachtsberg. Now, if you've never heard of a Christmas mountain, you're not alone. I hadn't either. Apparently, it's a miniature replica of the Erzgebirge's landscape, complete with tiny houses, trees, and, in some cases, mechanical figures that move, in most cases miners. Think of it as a Christmas diorama, but on a whole other level. The article on the notice board mentioned that a resident in the nearby village of Freiburg had set up a particularly elaborate Christmas mountain and was inviting visitors to come and see it. Chalmers and I exchanged a look and said, "This has to be it." So off to Freiburg we went by the bus. Freiburg was everything you'd expect from a Christmas villagey: narrow streets lined with snow, covered houses, twinkling lights strung between rooftops, and the sound of carolers drifting through the air. The whole place felt like a scene from one of those Christmas cards you keep but never send. Now, we were hoping to go straight to the Christmas mountain, but as luck would have it, we stumbled upon something else entirely: Hudsonabend. What in the world is that? For those of you not fluent in Erzgebirge traditions, like us at the beginning of our journey, a Hudsonabend is a cozy gathering where people come together to sing carols, share stories, and work on traditional crafts like lace making and wood carving. Naturally, Chalmers insisted we check it out. The gathering was held in a small community hall lit by dozens of candle arcs and warmed by roaring fire. As we walked in, we were greeted by the sound of a car singing, Silent Night, and the gentle clatter of wooden tools. One corner of the room was dedicated to lace making or klelpeln. Now, I've never been much for crafts, but watching these older ladies work their magic with tiny bobbins and delicate threads was mesmerizing. Chalmers, of course, had to mention that Dizenzo's grandmother, Elgart, was an expert lace maker. She had made so much bobbin lace. She could make whole tablecloths, he said. Each one a work of art, I said. Perhaps we should have commissioned her to make a lace candle arch when she was still alive, combine two traditions and see what happens. Chalmers just rolled his eyes and chuckled. The rest of the room was filled with wood carvers shaping intricate figurines, children stringing popcorn garlands, and older folks swapping stories about old neighbors. It reminded me so much of Memfield, our quirky little community coming together for the holidays, each person adding their own unique touch to the celebration. As we mingled, a small group of singers began a lively rendition of O Tannenbaum. That's when I noticed something unusual hanging by the fireplace. A small lace bag. It was beautifully made, with a delicate pattern of stars stitched into the fabric. Attached to it was a note. I swear, I said to Chalmers, if this is another clue, I'm going to start thinking we're on someone's elaborate treasure hunt. Sure enough, the note read, "Follow the scent of cinnamon and cloves to the path of the miner's star." Chalmers frowned. Who put this here? How did they know we'd come to this Hudsonabend? Maybe the Räuchermännchen is smarter than it looks, I said. Or maybe Dizenzo's behind this. You know how he loves a good mystery. Regardless of who left the note, we knew we had our next clue. Cinnamon and cloves. It had to mean something warm and spiced, like mulled wine or gingerbread. And the miner's star. That was a bit more cryptic, but we were determined to find out. Before we left, we thanked the hosts and promised to come back for another Hudsonabend someday. Chalmers even bought one of the lace bags to take back to Memfield, saying it would make a nice reminder of Dizenzo's grandmother. You're becoming quite the sentimentalist, I teased. Don't push it, Skinner, he said. With our spirits high and our next clue in hand, we set off once again, following the scent of cinnamon and cloves through the snowy streets of Freiburg. Where would it lead us? The scent of cinnamon and cloves led us through the snowy streets of Freiburg, past glowing windows and twinkling stars. It was enchanting, yes, but also confusing. Skinner, Chalmers said, how exactly are we supposed to follow a smell in a town filled with mulled wine stalls? I didn't have an answer. We wandered for what felt like ages, our noses leading the way, until we found ourselves standing in front of something unexpected: the Freiburg silver mine. The scent seemed to waft right toward its entrance, as if inviting us in. Now, let me set the scene for you. The mine was enormous, and a soft glow spilled out from lanterns hanging nearby, and the faint sound of metal tools echoed from within. It was both eerie and inviting, the kind of place where adventure feels inevitable. Chalmers, ever the geology enthusiast, lit up like a schwibbegen. Skinner, he said, this is it, the Freiburg silver mine. Do you know how rare these ores are? We're about to walk into history. His excitement lasted until we reached the ticket booth. The attendant, a cheerful woman bundled up against the cold, smiled apologetically and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're fully booked. You have to reserve well in advance, especially during the holidays." You should have seen Chalmers' face. He looked like someone had canceled Christmas. "Fully booked," he said, clutching the booth's counter as if it might change her mind. Now, I wasn't about to let his dreams of mineral exploration end here. I pulled out the note we'd found and said, "Oh, what a shame. We found this note that mentioned cinnamon and cloves, and it led us here, we thought." Her eyes widened. "Note, you say? Let me see." She read it, her expression turning thoughtful. "Well," she said, "maybe. Yes, I think we can make an exception, but you'll need to hurry. The next tour starts now. Straight to the lift." Chalmers practically sprinted, his disappointment replaced by sheer glee. We joined a group of bundled-up tourists and descended into the depths of the mine. The lift rattled and groaned as it carried us down, the air growing warmer and damper with every second. At the bottom, the guide, burly man with a beard that could rival Santa's, led us through a narrow tunnel. "This mine," he said, "dates back to the 13th century. It's one of the oldest in the region and played a key role in Freiburg's prosperity. The walls glittered faintly with traces of silver ore and other minerals, their beauty undimmed by the centuries." The guide explained how the miners spent long, grueling hours underground, their only light coming from lanterns. He said, gesturing to a glowing Schwibbogen mounted on the wall, "His white light became such a powerful symbol for us. It represented hope, safety, and the promise of returning home." Chalmers was in his element, asking questions about the mining process and jotting down notes like a student on a field trip. I, meanwhile, was more focused on the cinnamon and cloves. The scent was still there, faint but unmistakable, and it seemed to be coming from deeper within the mine. As the group prepared to move to the next section, the guide approached us. "I think," he said, lowering his voice, "you two might want to take a different path. Go left at the next fork. You'll find what you're looking for there. You can rejoin us later." Chalmers raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? What we're looking for?" The guide just smiled and said, "Trust me, it's worth it." Intrigued, we followed his directions, stepping into a narrower tunnel that seemed untouched by modern lighting. The air was thick with history, and that same tantalizing aroma. At the tunnel's end, we found a small, dimly lit room. It was simple, almost bare, with rough stone walls and a single wooden table at its center. My heart sank. After all that, there was no Stalin. Just the table and the faint scent of spices lingering in the air. I turned to Chalmers, ready to make a snarky comment about his overenthusiasm, when a voice rang out from the shadows. "You too sure took your time." We spun around to see a familiar figure step into the light. Dizenzo, our producer nowadays, some years ago just a good friend, grinning like a cat seeing his favorite treat. "Dizenzo," I said, "what on earth are you doing here?" while holding back my chuckles. He laughed and gestured to the table, which now held a platter of the most perfect looking Stalin I'd ever seen. "What does it look like?" "I've been waiting for you." "Wait," Chalmers said, pointing accusingly. "You're behind all this, the notes, the clues, this whole scavenger hunt." Dizenzo nodded, looking immensely pleased with himself. "Guilty as charged. But come on, admit it. It was fun, wasn't it? And now you get to enjoy the best Stalin in the Erzgebirge." I couldn't help but laugh. "You've been sending us on a wild goose chase just so we'd end up here." "Not a goose chase," he said, slicing into the Stalin. "A Christmas adventure. Now sit down and have a taste. And don't worry, no sultanas. You know I can't stand those." As we sat down about to share the Stalin, I had to admit, Dizenzo's plan had worked. The journey, the people we'd met, the history we'd learned. It all came together in that moment, in the heart of the Erzgebirge, with the sweet taste of Christmas and the warmth of friendship. But Chalmers asked, before we ate the Stalin, how Dizenzo knew we were going to meet the old lady and all. Dizenzo just laughed and said, "What old lady?" "I sent you an invitation to the Hudsonabend in Freiburg. That's where you found the other note." Chalmers replied, "An invitation? Oh, I forgot to look in the letterbox at the holiday home." Everyone laughed and I just said, "Well, then we've just taken a little diversion and made a new friend." It was a wonderful atmosphere. To Dizenzo, I said, raising an imaginary glass, "The mastermind of the best Christmas mystery we've ever had." Chalmers, still recovering from the surprise, just muttered, "Next time just send an invitation, via email." And with that, our adventure took a delicious turn. But the story wasn't quite over yet. With the last crumbs of Stalin disappearing from the platter, and Davinci still looking entirely too pleased with himself, we sat back in the dim glow of the mine's lanterns and let the moment sink in. It wasn't just the sweetness of the Stalin, though let me tell you, it was a slice of Christmas heaven. It was the feeling of warmth, of sharing, and of a holiday adventure well spent. So, Zenzo, I said, leaning back in my chair, this entire scavenger hunt was your idea. The Räuchermännchen, the notes, the perfectly timed hints. He grinned like a kid who'd just gotten away with sneaking an extra cookie. Of course! But it wasn't just about sending you running around. It was about making you experience the Erzgebirge the way it's meant to be experienced. Through its Christmas magic, its people, and yes, its food. And here I thought it was just because you wanted to keep the Stalin warm for yourself? Chalmers muttered, still eyeing the platter as if he was debating whether one more slice would be acceptable. Davinci laughed and reached into a bag at his feet. Don't worry, I wouldn't leave you empty-handed. He pulled out 2 beautifully wrapped packages, each tied with a red ribbon. These are for you to take back to Memfield. Share them with your friends. I took one of the packages, the scent of butter and spices already wafting through the wrapping. You're trusting us to share these. I joked. Do you know how dangerous that is with Chalmers sitting next to me in the plane? Chances are high they don't survive the trip back to Memfield. It's not just about the food, Davinci said and laughed, his voice softening. It's about sharing the joy and spirit of Christmas with the people you care about. That's the real magic of the Erzgebirge. The room fell quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty. Even Chalmers, who usually has something to say about everything, just nodded in agreement. After a few more laughs, a lot of thank yous, and some clumsy attempts to squeeze the Stalin into our already overstuffed bags, we said our goodbyes and made our way back up to the snowy surface. The rest of our holiday was a whirlwind of more markets, more traditions, and more stories to bring back home. But nothing quite compared to that moment in the mine, surrounded by history, holiday spirit, and the unmistakable magic of the Erzgebirge. When we finally returned to Memfield, Stalin in hand, we gathered our friends for a little Christmas feast. It was simple, just a warm fire, some glowing lights, and slices of the Erzgebirge's finest shared among the people we love. And you know, as I sat there watching everyone laugh and enjoy themselves, I realized that Davinci was right. The real gift wasn't the Stalin, delicious as it was. It was the chance to bring a little piece of the Erzgebirge's magic back with us, to share its light and warmth with the people who make Memfield feel like home. So, dear listeners, that's the story of how Chalmers and I went searching for the best Stalin and found something even sweeter. Wherever you are this holiday season, I hope you find your own bit of magic to share. And if you ever get the chance to visit the Erzgebirge, take it. You won't regret it. Merry Christmas, everyone, and as they say in the Mountains, Glück auf. Have a nice time with friends, family, and pets.